beyond the thunder and lightning, past the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome back. You know, the First Amendment reads as follows. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. When is the First Amendment not the First Amendment? Maybe when you're a Palestinian student in the United States saying things that the government doesn't like. Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they take place in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze these events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is free speech in the United States. President Trump recently posted, quote, "We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity. We will find, apprehend, and deport these terrorist sympathizers from our country, never to return again." My guest is a journalist and activist for peace and international human rights. His latest book is entitled Settler Colonialism in Palestine and Kashmir. Robert Fantina. Robert, welcome back.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
So as hundreds of demonstrators, this I think is from the New York Times, as hundreds of demonstrators rallied in New York City yesterday to demand the release of Mahmoud Khalil, U.S. District Judge Jesse Furman just steps away, blocked the Palestinian activist and Columbia University graduate's removal from the U.S. Khalil attended Columbia and helped organize protests last spring about the war between Israel and Hamas in Gaza. Federal immigration agents arrested him Saturday night over what officials said was his support for a designated terrorist organization, Hamas. He was told his student visa was being revoked, and then only to find out that it's not a student visa, it's actually a green card. ICE was informed that he was a permanent resident with a green card, but they detained him anyway. Robert Fantina, there's a lot going on here. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts?
There is so much going on. First of all, he was arrested and transferred to a holding facility in Louisiana to deprive him of easy access to his attorney and his supporters. That's one thing. Secondly, the fact that Trump says that Trump is conflating pro-Palestinian human rights activists with terrorists. Now, whether or not one wants to call Hamas a terrorist group is beside the point. Someone who is opposing the occupation of Palestine, who's opposing the continued genocide savage genocide of the Gaza Strip and now the West Bank, which is also undergoing genocide. Someone opposing that is not affiliated with any terrorist group. They're opposing terrorism. They're opposing state-sponsored terrorism. The fact that Donald Trump wants to conflate anti-Semitism with pro-Palestinian activism shows a high degree of ignorance of history, historical issues, and current events. This is the man in charge of U.S. foreign policy, and he knows nothing about it.
I'm glad you make up. You made the point about anti-Semitism because where did it go? I just had it. I wanted to read. Hang on. What? Oh, here we go. So here's the definition of anti-Semitism, and I'm going here because this is kind of how I usually do my analysis when we use terminology that is very familiar to us. Many of us might be comfortable in our familiarity with the term, but not really know the definition. Anti-Semitism is defined as a form of discrimination or hostility directed at Jews as a group and can include hatred, prejudice, or false beliefs. It can be expressed through speech, actions, or directed at Jewish people or property. And one of the things that I have found, and I'm not saying anything new, but I think it's important to highlight it here. One of the things that I have found is, as you just mentioned, the conflagration of, I think that's the right term, of pro-Palestinian sentiment and anti-Semitism. That if you are speaking against the genocide in Gaza, that if you are speaking for democracy in Palestine, if you are advocating the human treatment of Palestinians, that any of those things equate to anti-Semitism, nothing can be further from the truth.
That's absolutely correct. The United States has attempted, and Canada and other countries too have attempted, and in some areas succeeded, in passing legislation that equates criticism of the Israeli government with anti-Semitism. This is a ridiculous association. These two are not the same at all. I can criticize the government of Italy if I want to. It doesn't mean I'm criticizing Italians or Catholics. It just means I'm criticizing policies of the Italian government. So this conflating the two, that Donald Trump and his administration are so determined to accomplish, really makes no sense. The fact that people criticize Israel for violating international law, for committing war crimes, and these are documented. There is no question about that. The fact that Israel is now blocking all water, food, and medical supplies from entering into the Gaza Strip is a war crime. It is a crime against humanity. So Donald Trump is saying we can't criticize that because if we do, we're anti-Semitic. This has nothing to do with Semitism or anti-Semitism. This simply has to do with human rights and international law and Israel's violations of them.
Also, they want to conflate anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. And again, that is just patently false and wrong, because Zionism, first of all, not all Zionists are Jews, and not all Jews are Zionists. And one of the reasons is that Zionism is a political ideology that has hijacked the religion of Judaism and is using Judaism as a cover for its political, settler, colonial, white supremacist agenda.
Yes, absolutely. It's necessary to remember to make the separation between the terms Israeli, Jew, and a Zionist. Someone can be all three. Someone can be one of the three or two of the three. So there are Jews living in Israel who are opposed to Zionism. They support the human rights struggles of the Palestinian people, and they actively do that. There are Zionists in the United States, Christian Zionists. A spokesperson for the Netanyahu government a year or so ago said that Israel has lost the Jewish vote in the United States, and they rely on Christian Zionists to continue their support. That's because the Jewish religion does not foster genocide. It doesn't foster oppression. It doesn't foster occupation, and that's why we have organizations such as Jewish Voices for Peace and so on that are working toward the freedom for the Palestinians. In Israel, there are Israelis who monitor Israeli IDF soldiers' abuse of Palestinians at the checkpoints. These Israeli citizens who are doing this. Now, on the other hand, we have Israeli tours going to watch the bombing from a safe distance in Israel, to watch the bombing and killing of people in Gaza. So in Israel, it seems that most of them support the genocide, but there are people who are Jews, who are Israelis, who are opposed to Zionism. So conflating anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism is, again, a ridiculous notion, but one that gains traction with the MAGA crowd, the Donald Trump's radical right-wing base. These are Christian Zionists who have very little to do with Christianity, in my opinion, but they stand up for Donald Trump and for genocide.
And you were mentioning war crimes, and I happen to this semester be teaching international law, and right now we've just been going through some of the transcripts from the Nuremberg trial. Mm-hmm. And I just want to read a little bit because I find some interesting parallels here. The commission said that there can be no doubt that the majority of them actions taken by the Nazis came from the Nazi conception of total war, with which the aggression was raised. Everything is made, in terms of total war, everything is made subordinate to the overmastering dictates of war. Prisoners were ill-treated, tortured, and murdered. Civilian populations in occupied territories suffered the same fate. Whole populations were deported to Germany for the purposes of slave labor upon defense works, armament production, and similar tasks connected with the war effort. Public and private property was systemically plundered and pillaged in order to enlarge the resources of Germany at the expense of the rest of Europe. I just wanted to read just a little excerpt from the discussion and the debate at the Nuremberg trial, and they were trying to define what it was that was a war crime, what was a crime against humanity. And in reading through that, I found some eerily similar activity being taken currently by the Israeli Defense Forces against the Palestinians, as the Axis powers were found to have been guilty of at Nuremberg.
Yes, when you were reading that short excerpt, I was thinking the same thing. This sounds like Israeli treatment of the Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. The killing, the torture, the imprisonment without charge, the land confiscation, the destruction of property. You mentioned slave labor. The Palestinians prior to the October 7th were employed, some of them in Israel, for very cheap rates, because that was all they could get. They weren't allowed. The economy of the Gaza Strip was so strangled by the Israeli blockade that they were doing what they could do. The parallels are stark. Now, we've been told repeatedly that if we don't learn from history, we're going to repeat it. And once again, we're seeing this happening. Why do not world leaders understand this? We see it happen again and again and again, that history repeats itself. The horrors of history repeat themselves because those world leaders simply don't learn from the past.
Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House, said earlier today, if you're here on a student visa who's an aspiring young terrorist who wants to pray, this is what Mike Johnson said today. If you're here on a student visa who's an aspiring young terrorist who wants to prey upon your Jewish classmates, you're going home. The misappropriation of language, the outright lie that Mike Johnson just articulated. First of all, I think there's a difference between the permanent resident green card and a student visa. I think that's a misstatement by Mike Johnson. But simply because Mr. Khalil is anti-genocide, that here's the irony. That makes him a terrorist while the United States is actually backing a terrorist in Syria who is murdering Alawites, cutting off their heads, literally, boys and girls, cutting off people's heads and murdering them with firing squads. And that's being done with your tax dollars. Robert.
Johnson's statement was just so incredible. He says, if you were here as a student wanting to do terrorist activities. So, as you said, that's equating peaceful protest against genocide with a terrorist activity. Marco Rubio was asked about Israel's blocking of or ceasing of sending any electricity to Gaza, and was told, "Oh, that's perfectly fine. It's a negotiating tactic." This was most of the electricity was turned off already. This was electricity for desalination plants for drinking water. So now the Palestinians are going to have food, drinking water, medicine, or they haven't had electricity in a while. So who is the terrorist? Is it the student who is speaking out against genocide on a college campus? Or is it the government, as you rightly point out, that is committing these crimes and that is providing the bombs to Israel to commit genocide? Who is the terrorist in this situation? I think it's very clear that it's not Mahmoud Khalil or any of the students who are, whether foreign students or domestic students who are participating in demonstrations and last year in student encampments in order to protest genocide. The rhetoric that's coming from U.S. political leaders is absolutely ridiculous. They're an embarrassment on the world stage.
And quickly, just to reiterate the point, a devastating tragedy, 1,000+ people killed in Syria. In Syria, over 1,000 people have been killed, the vast majority of them civilians, in a spate of massacres largely targeting the country's Alawite religious minority. And for those that don't know, Alawites are a sect of Islam, which former President Assad was Alawite. Syria's longtime ruling family, the Assads, were members of the Alawite sect. The recent clash began last Thursday after coordinated attacks by gunmen linked to the former regime killed over 200 members of the new government forces. They're cutting off people's heads, right, and with our tax dollars.
Right, and I was focused on Gaza, but yes, this is happening in Syria. Wherever the United States is, you can find death, murder, slaughter, genocide. Since World War II, it's estimated that the United States government is responsible for 20 million deaths around the world. That's a tremendous amount. What we're seeing in Syria happening right now is supported by the United States. There's threat of more bombing of the United States will bomb or allow Israel to bomb Iran. Why is the United States, which is performing terrorism around the world and financing terrorism around the world, daring to criticize people in the United States, students who are maybe foreign students or domestic students, who are opposing genocide? And when you see what's happening in Syria today and what the United States is supporting there, the horrors, I said beheadings. This is, how barbaric is this? So, but the United States is simply willing to support it, finance it, and provide diplomatic cover in the United Nations and on the world stage for it. It's shocking, but this is business as usual for the United States. Possibly worse now under Trump than it's been in a while, but it is business as usual.
Marco Rubio wrote, "We know there are more students at Columbia and other universities across the country who have engaged in pro-terrorist, anti-Semitic, anti-American activity, and the Trump administration will not tolerate it. Many are not students, they are paid agitators. We will find, apprehend, and deport these terrorist sympathizers from our country, never to return again." I tie that with this. The Trump administration last Friday announced it would cancel approximately $400 million in federal grants to Columbia University, quote, due to the school's continued inaction in the face of persistent harassment of Jewish students. Robert, I'm not really aware of this alleged, how do they say it, continued harassment, persistent harassment of Jewish students, but talk about tying grant funding to educational institutions with this misperception, this whole lie of anti-Semitism and an attack on Jewish students.
We do know that Donald Trump and his various cohorts and his supporters look with disdain on higher education. They see the universities in the United States, especially the prestigious universities, as training grounds for liberal activism. And therefore, the idea of cutting funding to them is very appealing, because then the students won't be able to learn to think for themselves, which of course is a threat to U.S. hegemony. Now, Rubio's comments about, he says, we know that there are paid agitators, that there are people who are in these schools simply to perform anti-Semitic acts. Who knows this? Where is he getting this information? What is he saying about harassment of Muslim students, about Islamophobia on campus, about the kinds of things that Muslim students have to experience from other students, whether Jewish or not? So this is one case where he is singling out, and Donald Trump is doing this too, singling out some acts, some isolated actions, and saying they're universal, that they're all over the place. Another thing I want to mention regarding this is, in university, students are going to be uncomfortable. They're going to learn things that don't coincide with what they grew up with, their religious beliefs, their political beliefs. They're going to be exposed to different ideas. So being uncomfortable is part of the university environment. It's part of the growth experience. So when students say they're such state may be uncomfortable, well, deal with it, understand it, reply to it, think about it, push back on it. But the fact that some students or teachers, professors, are making some students uncomfortable, well, that's really a good thing. That's part of what the university experience is about, to get people to think, to challenge their own beliefs, and to maybe change their beliefs or to strengthen their beliefs. But this idea that there are all these students and paid agitators, what evidence is there of this? There's none that I've seen, and I follow this situation and these issues very closely. And all I see are statements by Marco Rubio that have nothing to back them up.
I am a college professor, and the first day of class, I tell my kids, My job, part of my job, is to make you uncomfortable. Part of my job is to take you outside of your comfort zone, because I am here to provide you information that's going to challenge many of the things that you've grown up believing. And if you can't grasp that, you're in the wrong space, and you're damn sure talking to the wrong guy.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's why I'm here. And not only is that why I'm there, that's why you're there.
Yes.
That's why you're in my class.
There seems to be this belief that people are going to university just to get a job. So I go and get a better job if I have a degree. The idea of critical thinking is being lost, I believe, and maybe you've seen that in your experience. But as I mentioned, people are going to be challenged, and maybe if I'm a student, I'm challenged, and I'm going to push back because I've heard your argument, but I don't agree with it, and here's my argument, and that'll challenge you. But maybe I'm going to say, yeah, what I've learned isn't making as much sense as it used to make. Now that I have some additional information, then I'm going to change. But it's all the idea of getting the student to think about things, to look beyond whatever environment they've grown up in, and maybe they've grown up in a wonderful environment, but there's still something else. There's another viewpoint that they probably haven't been exposed to. So the university is going to expose them to that, and you, Wilmer, are going to certainly expose them to that. And some of them are going to be uncomfortable, and that's okay. That's more than okay. As you said, you're doing your job, and they're doing their job.
And Dr. Nick Rivera, no, I do not require my students to view the podcast. They get the podcast every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday when they come to class. With that having been said, but I want to spend just another minute or so, because to me this is so critical. The attack. This is an all-out assault on academia. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump said on the campaign trail, I think during the 2016 campaign, I love the uneducated.
Mm-hmm.
I love the uneducated. And this is this all-out assault on academia is not limited to the Trump administration. We can go back to Dick Cheney, his wife Lynn Cheney. She would, during the Bush administration, I can't remember what think tank she was part of, but she led this attack on liberal professors. She was getting people deported. So again, this is not limited to the Trump administration. This is the culmination of years of assault on academic freedom and academics.
When Barack Obama was running for re-election, and I have lots of problems with Obama, but I want to just say this, that he said he wanted to make higher education available to anyone who wanted it. And some Republican said, oh, what an elitist. Because again, the idea that there is something elite about having this education, about learning, right? About education and about learning to think, about learning critical skills, critical thinking skills. And this I see in people I deal with on a semi-regular basis. There is no critical thinking skills. People don't know how to look at issues from different viewpoints. They don't know how to kind of put themselves in another person's viewpoint, another person's shoes, and understand how they're feeling and how they're thinking. May not agree with it, but you've got to be able to look at all the
process it.
What's that?
You have to be able to process it.
Exactly. Not just reject it or accept it. Look at it, think about it, ponder it, and then make a decision about it. But this automatic rejecting of it is just damaging to society.
My son, who is in graduate school, he's 23, he's in graduate school. He coined the phrase, the kids today aren't built for the no.
I like that.
He said and this was when he was in high school. He came, he said, Daddy, They can't handle pushback. He's talking about his contemporaries. He said, Daddy, they can't handle the pushback. They can't handle the argument. They're not built for the no. And I see that playing itself out in everybody wants a trophy for participation. Everybody wants a ribbon. They don't understand. They don't understand the grind, what it takes. In fact, I tell my kids, you're not here so much to learn. I teach international law and American government. You're not here so much to learn American government. This is not the 13th grade. You're here to learn how to learn. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And this subject matter is merely a vehicle to teach you how to learn. And when I say that, man, they're like, whoa. What?
Now, when you're teaching about international law and U.S. history, they're going to learn something about U.S. international and U.S. history, but they're also going to learn about how it makes sense, how it fits into the international community, how it fits into the U.S. society, if it's U.S. history, what the impacts have been then when certain actions took place in the past. What are the ongoing impacts? What does it mean today that the United States became a world power after World War II? What are the impacts of that? How is that being manifest today? So it's a matter of, it's not just here's the fact. It's the analysis of the fact, as you said, the processing of the facts and looking at their repercussions over time and marrying that to what's happening in the world today.
So do you see, getting back to Mr. Khalil, is this a justified action taken by the American government? Is this an overreach? And is this directly targeting Palestinian activists, or is he merely the target to make a broader point?
This is the start of targeting of pro-Palestine activists. This is his arrest was to intimidate them, to serve notice to anyone who supports Palestine that the government of the United States is out to get them, that it will, if they are a foreign student, it will remove their student visa or their green card arbitrarily and capriciously. If they are a U.S. student, who knows what harassment, they will be subject to probably expulsion from the school, if not maybe just suspension, but expulsion for, excuse me, for exercising their constitutional right to free speech. So these are people who will tell their grandchildren that they were penalized for opposing genocide, for opposing U.S.-led and supported genocide. But this arrest of Mahmoud Khalil needs to be a warning. It's a warning to Palestinians by the government, but free speech advocates, pro-Palestine advocates, and anti-genocide advocates, anyone who supports international law and human rights, has to take a warning from this, that they need to redouble their efforts to protect human rights, international law around the world. That's one of the lessons that comes from this.
Cherie, Ping One, Dr. Nick Rivera, Multi Tom Tom, all of you, Zhao Yun, all of you all, your thoughts on this question. What do you all think? Is this a justified action? Is it an overreach against pro-Palestinian activists? You all, please, in the chat, let us know what you think. And those of you that have not clicked on the like button, please do. We need more subscribers to this program. We're trying to get to 10,000, and the only way we can do that is if you all assist us in doing so. So let us know what you all think relative to this. And as you all are doing so, Robert, you made mention to Israel cutting electricity. A lot of people may not know what you were referring to. There's a piece in antiwar.com. Israel cuts electricity to Gaza, ramping up collective punishment. Israel has a plan to keep tightening the siege on Gaza and then restart the bombing campaign if Hamas doesn't agree to its terms. And Israel said this past Sunday it was cutting off electricity as it ramps up the collective punishment of the civilian population. And not only are they cutting off electricity, but they are cutting off, or by cutting off electricity, that impacts desalination plants that produce drinking water. And folks need to understand collective punishment is one of the elements of crimes against humanity, and it also can be a factor in determining war crimes. Robert Fantina.
And what we need to remember, though, is that when Israel says it's cutting off electricity, this is just the last bit of electricity that was allowed in, and it was for desalination of the water. Israel electricity has been cut off since October 7th. So the people of Gaza have been living in darkness at night. Some of them have been able to get batteries, which can sometimes be recharged through solar panels.
And in brutal winter. I mean, it's really cold there now.
It is cold. It is cold, and they're living in tents. They're living in makeshift tents. Some tents were able to be delivered since the ceasefire started January 19th, but not many. And people that I am in contact with there have found rugs that they're able to string up somehow over the ruins of buildings. I have videos of rain coming through the roofs because it's just cloth. And this is what the United States government says is fine for the people of Palestine. Now, also, Israel is saying that the electricity will be cut off until Hamas agrees to its terms. Hamas agreed to the terms, and that was the beginning of the ceasefire of January 19th. And one of the conditions was there was a framework for the second phase that should have been negotiated during the first phase. It's Israel that has decided to change the terms. Israel that has moved the goalposts. So now they're simply torturing the people of Palestine, hoping that they will break them. They haven't been able to do it in 75 years. They're going to do it now, and hoping that they can end this resistance. And the world governments are either looking the other way or actively supporting it. But people around the world have taken to the streets in huge numbers and continue to do so to support the Palestinian people. This eventually has to filter up to government leaders, but it hasn't done so yet.
And Clifford says it's an overreach. Multi-Tom says it's a violation of international law. Ping says it's fascism. Cherie says fascism. Where was this one? Netanyahu. Well, Netanyahu is killing Gazans any way he can. And Robert, talk about how what seems to have happened with the ceasefire was a turning of the sights to the West Bank. So as there was a cessation in violence in Gaza, there was then a direct escalation of violence in the West Bank.
And the Israeli government was very clear on this. Government spokespeople said they were going to do in the West Bank what they learned how to do in Gaza. And that's what they've been doing. The people in the West Bank are under horrific conditions now, while the people in Gaza got a slight reprieve. The oppression, the brutality in the West Bank accelerated at an astronomical pace. And yet the world is allowing it to happen. Now, the fact that this is going on in the West Bank now, again, another very crowded area of Palestine where the economy has been stifled for decades. So it's just more suffering of people. You mentioned that Netanyahu is killing Palestinians any way he can, and yes, he is. Starvation, bombing, children are dying of starvation in Gaza. The brutal oppression, drone strikes, sniper fire throughout the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. This kind of brutality is going on, and in real time, we're seeing it on social media. We don't see it in corporate media very much. We don't see it happening, but we see it on social media all the time, and yet the world is allowing it. Now, a week ago, at the Academy Awards, No Other Land won the Best Picture. That hasn't been distributed in the United States. No distribution company will touch it because it portrays the reality of the situation in part of the West Bank. The fact that it won an Academy Award, I think, is going to get some more publicity. But this is the kind of thing the United States does not want its people to know about because it's more interested in its geopolitical goals than in international law or human rights.
You know, Multi Tom Tom just posted babies are dying of cold, which we don't hear that much of. But I remember in when the United States first went in to Iraq, there was the story of the babies in the incubators being thrown on the floor, and so we heard, and that story was contrived. That story was a lie, but the whole idea was to demonstrate the barbaric nature of the Iraqi soldiers. They're killing babies. And then when early in the Ukraine crisis, we heard that the Russian forces had attacked a maternity hospital in Ukraine. That too was a lie, but it was contrived in order to tug at the heartstrings. These barbaric Russians are killing babies. And now we have babies really dying because of the denial of support, because of the denial of supplies, and because of the barbarism of the Israeli Defense Forces, and that falls upon deaf ears.
Yes. When there's a rumor, when the October 7th resistance action first happened, Joe Biden, president at the time, went on the air and said, "Oh, they killed babies. They beheaded babies." That was
babies, right?
And within a couple of hours, his spokespeople said, "Well, we have no evidence of that, but that's what Netanyahu told us." And no evidence of that has been exposed in the 17 or 18 months since then. That didn't happen. But as you said, children are dying. We're seeing it on social media. We're seeing pictures of babies frozen to death, babies starving to death. There was a picture the other day of a man holding a baby that was just emaciated, just skin and bones, still alive. Imagine how that man feels being unable to provide food for this dying baby. And yet this doesn't get publicity, but a lie about Palestinians killing children gets publicity. You mentioned the situation back in Iraq. That was used in Congress. It was quoted again and again and again, when it turned out it was the nurse who reported it was not a nurse. She was the daughter of the Kuwaiti ambassador. She had been given a script by a public relations firm to say these things to garner support for an invasion of Iraq. So this is the kind of way that the U.S. works. This propaganda. I have a book which I see on the ticker: Propaganda, Lies, and False Flags: How the U.S. Justifies Its Wars. So that's one of the ways that the U.S. is attempting to justify this Israeli genocide by saying, "Oh, the Palestinians are savages. They've killed these babies." There's no evidence of it. There is evidence of Israelis killing Palestinian children and babies, but that doesn't play into the narrative that the United States wants portrayed to the world. So that is only heard on social media.
Former Philippine President Duterte was just arrested based upon an ICC warrant. He was in Hong Kong, I believe, and has now been flown to Geneva. Do you see on the horizon a possible fate for Netanyahu, based upon being an alleged war criminal? And I say alleged because there has not been a trial to convict him.
Much as I would like to see that happen, Netanyahu is going to avoid going to any country that would arrest him. Now, those countries that won't, that even some who have signed on to the Rome Statutes of the International Criminal Court, are going to be willing to violate their agreement because they will kowtow to what the United States says and does. But certainly there are European countries and Asian companies and countries throughout the global South that Netanyahu will not be able to visit, because if he does go there, he will be arrested. So while I don't see it happening anytime soon, I hope it happens. And I hope that the world leaders of every country that have signed on to the Rome Statute and who have committed to arresting anyone who's accused of war crimes will honor that.
And I believe Henry Kissinger had to live his life that way. He had a permanent staffer whose sole responsibility was to monitor his travel plans, to be sure that he never went to a country that could arrest him, nor even fly through the airspace of a country that could arrest him. And I believe that former President W. Bush has to live his life in the same manner. I'm not certain on that one. I know that's how Kissinger had to live and travel. But I believe that W has to operate in a similar manner.
Well, Kissinger certainly, he lived to be 100, and his travel was restricted because he was a wanted war criminal, which is, he was certainly a war criminal. I have no doubt about that. I'm not sure about George W. Bush, but I don't think any president can say they may not have been charged with anything, but going back generations, I think most U.S. presidents have been war criminals.
There was an interesting article in the Libertarian. Now I'm drawing a blank on the name. Let me see quickly here. Where'd it go? On the from the Libertarian Institute. Israeli intel says Netanyahu policies led to Hamas attack, and the premise of the piece is that Netanyahu had this policy of quiet that allowed Qatar to send funds to Hamas, and it was the sending of those funds to Hamas that led to this massive buildup that resulted in the October 7th attack. Your thoughts on this piece from the Libertarian Institute? Oh, I think Robert just had to step away for a moment, and I think he might have been having a coughing attack. He's had to go get some water. So he'll be right back with us in a second, folks. Multi-Tom asked, why didn't the ICC arrest Netanyahu? Well, you got to understand that there's a lot of power behind Netanyahu. Duterte is not considered, is not nearly as, Duterte does not bring with him the military backing that a Netanyahu does. And so there was no way that as much as Netanyahu should have been arrested when he set foot on American soil, there was no way that was going to happen. And also because the United States, I don't think and Robert may know the answer to this, I don't think the United States is a signatory to the Rome Statute. And we know also that if an American is taken to The Hague, there's a piece of American legislation. I think it's called the Hague Invasion Act that the United States says, you take any American citizen there, we will invade The Hague. If you do so. Robert Fantina.
Yes, and that is why the United States has not signed the Rome Statute, because it doesn't want any of its citizens held accountable for any war crimes they commit. The United States is above the law in the view of the United States government. So this is, again, business as usual. The United States can demand that other countries adhere to international law, but it doesn't have to, according to its own interpretation. Might makes right in the view of the United States. So this is why there's been no, when during Afghanistan there were many instances of U.S. soldiers committing crimes against the people of Afghanistan. They were never held accountable because that's the way the U.S. government operates.
And it's also tangentially to this. Rarely, particularly during the Biden administration, rarely did you hear them reference international law. Tony Blinken's favorite term was the rules-based order, which has no standing definition. That's a creation of the mind, I believe, of Tony Blinken. But the only time you'd hear Joe Biden or Tony Blinken talk about international law is when it was in the best interest or advantageous to the United States to do so. Otherwise, most times when you hear them talking in an international context, it was Tony Blinken talking about the rules-based order, which was an idea, a concept, or a construct created in his warped mind. It has no international definition or acceptance.
No, it doesn't. Although international law certainly does, and that's why that's why the United States doesn't want to talk about it. They want to talk about the rules-based order. And you mentioned how the United States will enforce international law when it is to its advantage. Prior to the Iraq War, the government of Iraq had violated one resolution of one United Nations resolution, and the United States went into war based on that. Now, Israel has violated numerous, at least dozens of resolutions, but the U.S. is okay with that because it's an ally. It's not sitting on huge amounts of oil that the United States wants. It doesn't have any relations with Russia that the United States disapproves of. So its violations of international law are perfectly fine.
And I had asked, you had to step away. This Libertarian Institute piece, Israeli intel says Netanyahu policies led to Hamas October 7th attack. They talk about Netanyahu's policy of quiet that allowed funding from Qatar to quietly flow into Hamas's coffers, and that's what's enabled Hamas's massive buildup. Your thoughts on that whole piece?
Well, this is, again, so convoluted. The Israeli government wanted to keep Fatah, which governs the West Bank, separate from Hamas, which of course governs the Gaza Strip. If they united, they would have been stronger, and that's not what Israel wanted or the United States wanted. So it continued to provide support through Qatar to Hamas so that it would remain strong and wouldn't have to give in to any demands that Fatah in the West Bank wanted. So this was, rather than trying to resolve the issue, rather trying to bring peace and human rights and to follow international law for the Palestinians, the Israeli government simply wanted to keep the status quo, where they could continue to encroach with illegal settlements. They continue to periodically bomb the Gaza Strip and arrest the people throughout all parts of Palestine. And by financing or allowing financing for Hamas, they were, in their view, successful in doing that. But look at the outcome. If the Israeli government wants its people to live in security and in peace, the way to do it is by following international law and ending the occupation and enabling self-determination for the Palestinian people, not by trying to pit one aspect of the government against another aspect of the government. This is just a game that is going to have dire consequences down the road, as it has had for the Palestinians now, but also for the Israelis. I've mentioned before in different places, the Israeli people cannot expect to live in safety and security until and unless there is a free and independent Palestine. And Netanyahu's policies of supporting, financing Hamas have pushed that idea of self-determination and independence for Palestine farther down the road. And now they're reaping the consequences of it.
And to that point, that's one of the major selling points that Netanyahu has been using to try to convince Israeli citizens that he's the one and the only one that can protect them. And that is why, in his mind, the total elimination or extermination of Hamas is so important. But the failure or the fallacy in his logic, or one of the many failures and fallacies of his logic, is you cannot kill an ideology with a military. You only replace an ideology with a better ideology. Robert Fantina.
Even Tony Blinken said that despite the numbers of Hamas fighters that Israel has killed, they've been replaced by new recruits who are so enraged by what's happening. So this isn't going to change. As you said, Hamas is an ideology. It's and the people in Palestine, Gaza, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem are looking for peace. They're looking for peace. They're looking for the basic human rights. They're looking for self-determination. The Hamas was elected in elections that world observers viewed as open and honest, because they offered hope to the people of Palestine, something that Fatah in the West Bank does not. Mahmoud Abbas, who is the leader of Fatah in the West Bank, is a puppet of Israel and the United States. He works with Israel to repress the Palestinian people. So why would anyone vote for that party? Why would any Palestinian vote for that party? And that's what the Israeli government, the U.S. government, fail to understand. They think they can simply break the wills of the Palestinian people. But as I mentioned before, in 75 years, they have not accomplished it. They're not going to accomplish it now.
And final issue, Yemen's Houthis give Israel deadline to start allowing aid to enter Gaza. The leader of the Houthis has given them a deadline. Abdul Malik al-Houthi issued the ultimatum on Friday, suggesting Ansar Allah attacks on Israel-linked shipping could start today. And we haven't really heard a lot about Ansar Allah in recent months, and we haven't heard much from them. But that could change in the very near future.
Yes, it could. We have to realize that Yemen has gotten much more powerful over the years. They were bombed by the United States and Saudi Arabia for several years, but then they started striking back. So, and then since the genocide against the Palestinians began October of 2023, they have been quite effective in disrupting shipping of Israeli ships, trade to Israeli ports and from Israeli ports. They are certainly a factor to be contended with, and Israel has to recognize that it isn't just the Palestinians they're fighting. They're going to be fighting the people of Yemen and the Yemeni military. Lebanon is still in the picture, and Iran is still definitely in the picture. This is Yemen has the Yemeni spokespeople have said, the Houthi spokespeople have said this is going to start very soon. As you said, it could start today, but they are not alone in the resistance. The resistance is strong throughout the Middle East, and Israel should know that by continuing to violate ceasefire agreements, by continuing to commit crimes against humanity and war crimes, it's not going to bode well for the so-called nation of Israel. And the Israeli people are not going to have security, as we've mentioned before.
And as we get out, Robert, anything that you want people to understand that we didn't touch on today, anything that in my collection of stories and sending stories to you today to cover, is anything I missed, anything you want people to understand?
I don't think we missed anything. I want to stress the fact that the people of Gaza are without food, water, medical supplies, or electricity. They have been without those for several months. There was a slight reprieve starting January 19th, but still the supplies were not coming in that should have been. And the people in the West Bank, as we talked about, are suffering horribly and are being ignored. So people need to be aware of this and take action within their governments to assist the people of Palestine who are being victimized by two of the most powerful nations on the planet, and they have little besides rocks and stones with which to defend themselves.
And I'll end by saying this. Being pro-Palestinian isn't being anti-Israeli, it's being pro-Palestinian. Being anti-Zionist is not being anti-Semitic, it's being anti-Zionist. And if you stand on the side of humanity, if you stand on the side of anti-genocide, as Dr. King told us, the moral arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. I'll leave it there. Robert Fantina, thank you, sir. Greatly appreciate it. Look forward to having you back.
Thank you.
Folks, thank you all for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. We need you all to subscribe to the show. We're reaching critical mass here, and we truly need, I'm not making these appeals because I have nothing else better to do. I'm making these appeals because we are in dire need of your support. We're doing this for you, but we can't do this without you. And hitting that like button is key to keeping us on the air. Please follow, subscribe. Tomorrow, Ajamu Baraka is going to join us. Please follow, subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. And we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.